Hi, I am Tony Russo, and welcome to this latest bonus episode of Funeral Service Insider, the podcast. This week, we're starting a new holiday tradition wherein we read a holiday-themed story that has appeared in one of our magazines. We hadn't planned to do this, but Tom Nondorf, who is the editor of American Cemetery and Cremation, did a really cool Christmas story that I thought was so good. I asked him if he would please read it and we could put it out as a bonus episode. And over the course of this production, it's something that we decided we'd like to at least try to do every year. So while we will be working on some for next year, we would love it if you shared your holiday stories with us. Any of the holidays, if you want to tell us a working Thanksgiving, working New Year's, working Christmas story, we would love to collect them and share them with everyone else, because it is really kind of a central touchstone to whomever is in funeral service to have stories about, working on a holiday when you could be home with your family instead. So anyway, here is this story from Tom Nondorf, and I will catch you on the other side with one final appeal. And in case you dip out before them, let me now wish you the very happiest of all the winter holidays, whichever you celebrate, and hopes for a fantastic 2025. Okay, here's Tom.
On a narrow strip of land across Eastern Valley Road from Bellevue Baptist Church in McCalla, Alabama, in Jefferson County, southwest of Birmingham, lies Kimbrell Cemetery. Surrounded by pines and bisected by power lines, the cemetery was founded in 1915 and has just south of 250 burials. One is a personal hero of mine, Fred Raymond, whose story ends, in a way, at the cemetery, as many stories do. But our story, the one I'd like to share, begins in a random fashion about 35 years ago. My Christmas break from freshman year of college had ended, and I wasn't overly happy to be headed back. I had thought I wanted to get away from my Atlanta family environs and become a young Faulkner in Oxford, Mississippi. But I spent my first semester feeling isolated and disconnected. My own fault, I just hadn't learned to be a social creature yet. With the break over, I had delayed my departure from the comfort of home until a Sunday afternoon. Then I hit the road to drive out of Georgia on I-20 through Birmingham and along the smaller 2 lanes that would take me through the backwoods, past Tupelo, and on through more of the same until I hit campus. It was 80 miles past Birmingham that my Plymouth Horizon began to stutter, and eventually come to a halt at the closed gates of a 3M plant in a town called Gewin. This was well before cell phones. I was too far along to hope my folks could come get me, and too far from school where I didn't have anyone to call anyway. I got out of the car, opened the hood, and gazed at my engine cluelessly as a light rain began to fall. No idea about how cars worked. The best strategy I could muster was to look pathetic, and I must have succeeded as an old man drove over and pulled up. His name was Earl, and the first words he said to me were, "You look like a lost puppy dog," which is what I was. He drove to a nearby mechanic, and I was able to get the Plymouth to lurch along behind him. It was a service station in the mode of Gomer and Goober Pyle's shop, which is not a comment on the guys who work there. That's just what the place looked like. One of those old cinder block small-town garages that used to exist. And they were nice enough to tell me that I likely needed a new carburetor and would probably be stuck in town for a few days. I didn't really have the mental toolkit for that news. Earl, sensing my desperation, thought a moment and said, "Well now, I know my brother-in-law is the best mechanic in the state, but he's probably asleep because he drives an hour into Birmingham to work at 6 in the morning. Let's go over there." Soon I was lurching behind Earl again, to a house a couple miles away, not looking forward to the prospect of waking a sleeping bear, even if he was the best mechanic in the state. But once at the house, I witnessed true Southern hospitality unfold. The mechanic in question, Fred Raymond, roused from sleep, didn't grouse one bit, asked me a few questions about the car, and got right to work on the engine, with his teenage son Rusty at his side, while his wife Delilah attempted small talk with this sullen Atlanta boy. The next couple hours were like watching an episode of MacGyver as Fred diagnosed the problem was a carburetor filled with charcoal bits from a decaying catalytic converter, and turned his shop vac into a pump to blast it clean, reversed the polarity of this and that, explaining to me what he was doing the whole time. Long story short, by nightfall my car was fixed and they sent me on my way with best wishes, and as Delilah says today, the certain knowledge that they would never hear from me again. That's where my younger self surprises me still. Driving away that night, all I could think was, these people didn't know me from a hole in the ground, didn't ask me who I was, didn't care, just helped me out in a time of need. Simple as that. How could I repay that? I kicked myself for not offering them the cherry pie my mom had given me for the road. Then again, I would need that cherry pie as I got to school, only to find the dorms didn't open until the next day, so the pie ended up being my late-night motel dinner. But the only thing I could think to do was to let them know I'd never forget them. Earl had left me a business card, and through that address I was able to write a thank you note to him and to the Raymonds, and I wrote another the next Christmas, by which time I'd transferred closer to home in Georgia. And I'd send another Christmas card the next year, and the year after that, and I've never missed in all the years since, even as I moved around the country for grad school and jobs, and the Raymond family moved from Gewin to Hueytown, closer to Fred's mechanic gig. And I would get Christmas cards and notes back telling about their lives, and somewhere over the years, the script flipped. The Raymonds, who I came to know as, again, Fred, who besides being a mechanic was also a preacher, Delilah, his wife, and their kids Angie, Rusty, and Kelly, and later Kelly's husband David, they could not believe my kindness. Here I thought I was simply repaying them for theirs, but my annual cards to them became a part of their Christmas tradition, a household totem, and they thought I was the greatest person for keeping in touch without fail. Later I got to see this in a funny way. For 20 years I lived in New York City, and though we'd stayed in touch, the idea of ever really seeing the Raymonds again seemed remote. Then a seemingly unrelated sad thing happened. Returning to my Hell's Kitchen apartment one night after work, there was an ambulance outside. When I went in, I learned that my neighbor below me, a sweet old lady who lived there for 50 years and could always be found out on the porch waving to everyone, this social butterfly of my street, had passed away. It just so happened that there was a block association meeting that night, and I thought, well, everyone knows her, so I should go and let people know what happened, which I did. While there, I met and made friends with a young lady from the block, and we hit it off and went for a drink. Turned out she was not only from Alabama, but her family lived a few miles from where the Raymonds lived. We started dating, which led to the moment around Christmas 2008 when I showed up at Fred and Delilah's house to surprise them with a hand-delivered Christmas card. So we arrived at their house, and it appeared at first nobody was home, a potential fizzle. Then a pickup truck pulled into the driveway, and a man I recognized as Fred got out and approached. I said, "Hello, sir, I got this mail of yours by mistake." "Yeah, that's been happening a lot," he said, no idea who I was. Then he looked at the envelope and a smile crossed his face, and he said, in a moment I'll never forget, "Oh, we've been waiting for this." I played dumb and listened as he began to tell me the story of me. See, years ago, this boy was going to school at Ole Miss, I think, and his car broke down one night, etc., etc. He finished, and I said, "Fred, what if that boy was me?" He looked at me quizzically, and I said, "Fred, it's me, Tom." Recognition, finally. "Thomas!" Within about 10 minutes, we were in the house, and every relative in the county was there. It was a joyful reunion, and they took me out to breakfast the next day, and from that point, the floodgates of togetherness were open. Fred and Delilah visited me in New York, which Fred did not love, but Delilah loved enough to return again for my wedding. They would send Christmas presents for my kids. We were now family. Now, that part of the story I've told many times over the years, and people enjoy it. This part is harder to tell and a little hard for even me to believe. 2 Christmases ago, mid-December was approaching, I had dawdled and needed to get my Christmas card in the mail because that was my vow to myself, and I knew what it still meant to Fred and Delilah. So I sent it out on December 10th, 2 days later, I heard from Fred's daughter, Kelly, that he had passed away suddenly. When I reached Delilah, I told her I was crushed and what Fred had meant to me, and I was feeling pretty bad that I hadn't gotten the card in the mail sooner. But Delilah texted, and I quote, "Tom, he'd brought your card in when he got home. He was smiling. May have been his last smiles. Thank you." Understand that I live in the Pacific Northwest. The card got to Alabama in 2 days via regular U.S. mail. I'd say if you're in Alabama and headed down Eastern Valley Road, give a tip of the cap to my friend Fred as you drive by. But the fact is, as we know, every cemetery is filled with stories of people who touch the lives of others and had theirs touched by those they love. So tip your cap wherever you are when you can, as I've seen in my time of covering stories on cemeteries, death care and those involved, celebrating the people who support families when the chips are really down. The best thing you can do with a kindness given is to remember it, to reflect it, and don't be surprised if it gets reflected right back at you. When you show the giver that it lives in your heart, a new kindness is formed. Call it a positive feedback loop or just humanity at its best.
Once again, I want to wish you the very best of the winter holidays from all of us here at Kates-Boylston Publications. This bonus episode has been a Kates-Boylston production. It was written and performed by Tom Nondorf, edited for audio by me, Tony Russo. And now please let me renew my appeal to share with us any holiday stories about you and funeral service that you would like shared more widely, because we'd be happy to do that. And as always, please subscribe wherever you're listening. Now, if you're listening on your computer, you can subscribe to us on your phone. If you have an iPhone, you can click on the Apple Podcast app. If you have an Android type app, you can find us on Spotify or on Amazon Music for sure, or any of the other podcatchers that are out there. Again, just type in Funeral Service Insider and we will come up, and you can subscribe to us, and that way you will get notified every time there's a new show that comes up. And to be clear, it is absolutely free to subscribe to this podcast. In a world where subscription sometimes means you have to pay, it doesn't mean that for this podcast. We have a blast making it, and we have so many great things in store for 2025. Actually, next time, Tom and I will be talking about the best stories of the year. But until then, that will do it for this episode of Funeral Service Insider, the podcast.